Welcome to the Parent Problems Today podcast. Today you're joined by myself, Robert Trout, and Paul Arredondo from the Parent Trainers team. And today's episode's kind of straightforward. At least it usually starts out that way until we really get into it. Because today we're going to step onto a conversation that happens with a lot of parents, but specifically I had a mother this week. And Paul, what we're going to get into is kinds of consequences, and specifically, at least where we're going to start, is the basic understanding of natural consequences. And I guess I'll kick off for the listener that when we talk about consequences, there are two basic types until you get into the specifics, and that is natural consequences. And by definition, natural consequences are events or actionable items that come up in someone's life that are a direct natural result of a decision that they've made, meaning that someone didn't have to make something happen to them for them to realize that something had gone wrong or right. It's just the natural flow of you do this happens because we're human and live with Mother Nature, and that's how life works. The second category of consequence then is contrived consequence. And what this means is that there has been an action or a decision. And usually it comes down to human kind of policies at this point of social convention, religious doctrine, different family belief systems, things like that. That's where contrived comes in because they're like, oh, well, we, the family, the parents, the church, the community, the world, we don't want you to do what you just did. So there is a contrived or designed consequence from these people reinforcing the behavior that they wish to have happen to kind of stop whatever has happened or to make what happened become permanent because they want you to keep down the line that you're doing. And that's important to understand about consequences. A lot of people have a negative connotation. Consequence means punishment. That's absolutely not true. So if you're listening to this, that kind of needs to be step one, is consequence is not a bad thing. Consequence is the action or reaction to decisions or actions and behaviors that someone is living through their life or deciding as they go through their life. And those are good and bad. It's just literally the thing that happens because of the thing you said or did. That's the consequence structure that we're kind of looking at there. So, Paul, I'll pass it to you. What comes up for you with the families we work with and with parents that are looking at kind of working with teens, tweens, and young adults when it comes down to consequences? What are the first thoughts that just come up for you?
I think that as we talk about natural consequences and these contrived consequences, I think there is also a need to make sure that they're measured no matter what they are, right? Make sure they actually fit the bill, right? If it's a first time that they lied to you, you're not going to ground them for a month, right? Being a contrived consequence. So, having the measured understanding of what is actually appropriate developmentally and age, and is this the first time or the fourth time that they've had this behavior, and being able to meet that moment and understand how to, for lack of a better way of saying it, ramp up the tone of the conversation. Let them know that you're serious about, hey, this needs to change, this needs to stop, this is inappropriate. We need to have another conversation about this, and you need to truly understand. So those are my immediate thoughts.
Yep. Well, I want to step into a process that parents don't understand sometimes around consequences is parents very often will focus on the punishment aspect. Well, you did this, so now this is going to happen to you. But parents often forget that when you sit the child down, when you sit the teenager down to have the conversation about what they've done wrong, for most teenagers, they consider that conversation a part of the consequence,
Certainly.
right? And sometimes parents totally miss that. They're like, "No, we're going to have this big discussion about what you just did wrong, and then the consequence is going to happen." But the
Hmm.
truth is for most humans, it starts with being caught in the behavior or action, And then the consequence is the entirety of the experience that
Right.
happens after that fact. Because for a lot of kids, and we've worked with a lot of teenagers, I know we've heard a lot of them be like, oh my God, I have to listen to this again. Because this is not the first time they've broken a rule or gone through a consequence sequence with the parents. And there's this whole aspect where the parents are like, well, first I'm going to really let you know what you did wrong. And then you're going to go through this consequence. And for the parent, they forget that this impacts their emotional connection and relationship connection with the kid. Because if you make a consequence too long, for example, or too outside the box, where it's just unreasonable in the reaction to the behavior, that's when you start running into family system problems because the kid's like, no, I'm done. I'm not even going to sit and listen to this conversation based on what I just did. Now I'm going to start a whole new category of behaviors because they've heard this dad speech 10,000 times and they're done. So, very often parents miss that it's starting to spin out of control in multiple directions from different actions and behaviors on both sides. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll even take that a step further, Rob, in the recognition that a lot of kids have already experienced a consequence before they even have the conversation with their mom or dad, right? Like I have a very prime example of a just 3 days ago, a kid came home from summer camp and the mom was telling me, oh my God, my daughter bullied another girl. And so when we got in the car, I tried to tell her what was going, how that's inappropriate. And then it turned into this big blow up.
Yep.
Right. And so, of course, the way the mom learned about what happened with the daughter was from a camp counselor. The camp counselor had already sat her down and had a discussion with her about appropriate behavior. And of course, her daughter was embarrassed. Her daughter was sad. Her daughter was struggling with like the reflection of her behavior. And then the mom piles on.
Yes.
And what the mom almost also said was that this was very out of character for my daughter. So I was really frustrated and confused. And I said, okay, you need to deal with that first before
Yes.
you then have a conversation with your daughter, because that's your stuff, right? If this is out of character, okay, be curious.
Yes.
And so there's these missed opportunities that I think, again, parents feel like I need to come in and teach them a lesson. And it's like, whoa, I think they've already learned some stuff. Be curious about that first. And if
Yes.
they are not remorseful, then you probably need to have another conversation. Then there's probably a need to, again, think about further consequence or really stepping into making the point feel a little bit more pronounced or
Yes.
understood.
Yeah, and in a normal circumstance, what people miss is that if a natural consequence has already occurred, like the kid at camp, they worked it out at camp. The camp
Hmm.
counselor put in the discussion and probably some kind of consequence. And that's the natural, like, this happened, and now it should be done. The issue is when you start piling. You just use
Yep.
that word, so I'm just going to use it because it's a great metaphor of, well, now I'm going to really make sure she understands that she did something wrong versus
Right.
the, hey, what happened? What'd you learn? Great, we can move on. I don't have to do anything in this. And that over like piling
Over parenting.
on is
Yeah.
gonna really impact your relationship because to the kid, this thing's already over. And that's
Mhm.
okay. It's okay for these instances to be gone in the past because if you try to pile on, at least for me, I see two reactions. One is the kid starts either internalize over time and they become the bad kid, right? Or you see on the other side of it where they start to become defensive, and
Right.
that's where they're fighting for any self worth they can hold on to over time because the kid at the camp was on them, the counselor was on them, now mom's on them, and then I'm going to get home and dad will be on them. And it's just like, okay, hold on, hold on. We've got to let things settle in
Right.
this process, and I think let's use that to kind of jump backwards in this conversation back to the kind of understanding consequence or the kinds of consequence in this because A natural consequence is really delicate in today's modern world. So I do want to touch on that. Let's look at that from the standpoint of, at least from our background, you take kids camping, right? And the kid decides to leave their clothes outside of the tent while you go out on a short day hike or something, and it rains. The natural consequence to that is that all the clothes are wet, and the child has to figure out, like, okay, I decided this, there is a result that it's wet, and now I have to problem solve it. So the consequence becomes starting a fire and drying the clothes and spending all of their time trying to get back to a place of equilibrium, which is
Mhm.
important in this conversation, because natural consequences create equilibrium, because you have to solve for it. What do you got to that?
Yeah, let's stick with. I want to go back to the example of the girl who comes home from the camp. Her natural consequence is she has to go back to the camp the next day. She
Yes,
actually has to manage those relationships. She has to see that counselor. She has to do the repair work. And then she has to actually show up in relationship. And those are the bigger lessons that any young person needs to learn is like, how do I show back up? How do I do repair?
yeah.
Because that's actually the kind of final turn of consequence is creating a moment of healing, a moment of retribution, a moment of stepping back in.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the equalization, the normal flow of life. And
Hmm.
that's where, as a parent, what we're talking about today is understanding that you don't have to do anything.
Right.
It's a good idea to just bring it up like, hey, what happened? Tell me what you learned. I'm glad you learned something. Let's go get ice cream.
Yeah. And what are you going to do next time differently?
Yeah, if that's appropriate, because sometimes that can
Hmm.
be a trigger too. So it's know your kid. There's a
Of
certain
course.
end point in the conversation, right?
Yeah,
So know
definitely.
your kid, know the end point, and take it as far as you can in the role that you have with the rapport you have in your role as mom, dad, or other in that circumstance, right? But you play a role, but you're not the ultimate, like, I'm going to really make sure they got this. Like, let them go back to camp the next day and make the same mistake. That's okay, because they're going to test where the boundaries and lines are. And that's a natural order of things. I mean, some of
Yeah.
the most devastating things, I can use this instance as a circumstance, would be where parents say, well, you're not going back to that camp. And very often that's actually tied to embarrassment for the parent, not actually for the kid and things like that. So parents will make the mistake of removing kids from the environment that they can test and learn in, things like
Right.
that, where it's like, okay, you're removing natural consequence and taking this into contrived. You're trying to be like the overlord of, like, you can't embarrass this family or me, or you're such a bad kid, or whatever is being reinforced verbally or behaviorally within the family system. So it's a really basic understanding for any parent that if your kid does something like this circumstance, you just let the natural world take care of it. Now, you be there to mentor, answer questions, and take it as far as you can. But natural consequences are things that you really don't have to participate in very heavily. You really don't. They're just going to be learned.
And I would let's give another example of what I like to think of as a natural consequence, but some parents are very hard pressed to allow the space for it. Is if your kid doesn't complete their homework assignment, or they don't turn in an assignment, or maybe they're on the verge of failing a class, let it happen. Let them experience that rather than drag them across the finish line, sit next to them and get their homework done, and because then you're again moving into a contrived consequence and you are the consequence. And then that impacts your relationship. And I'm not saying don't support them, get them a tutor, talk to the school. Those are consequences. Those are
Yes.
ways to support them in taking a good next step. So, what are the supportive consequences? Not just the punishment, but what is going to get them to that next step of understanding of these are my priorities. This is how I should manage my time. This is what I need to accomplish in order to stay in good stead with X, Y, and Z.
Yep. Well, let's talk about that, because when we talk about natural consequences in the modern world, most of the time your kid's not leaving stuff on the front lawn, is getting rained on, right? Like what we're talking
Exactly
about
that.
here is something like homework. And
Mhm.
then it is the letting go of the result in that as the parent, because yes, they don't turn in the homework, they get a failing grade, it impacts their grades. You're hoping that you don't have to be the one making them feel bad about that grade not being good. It's that they're working towards a goal. And sometimes this does take a little bit of implementation in the sense of like, oh, well, you are working towards getting three A's and two B's. And the agreement we made at the beginning of the school year is if you can hit this mark, you get this computer you wanted or skateboard you wanted or whatever it was. Like the kid has a goal they're working towards. And that's in a reward system. Sometimes that doesn't work for kids. I'm just giving an example, one
Right.
example. So it's just recognizing that kids are working towards something that they can lose. If they can lose something, it impacts how they feel. And that's what we're really looking for when it comes to natural consequences. And if you're a parent trying to follow natural consequences in this modern world, there is some participation, but it's got to stay in the same category. And that's where the natural comes in. And you just gave a great example. You're failing this class. The consequence to that isn't you're grounded for the next 6 months. The consequence to that is you're going to start working with a tutor 3 days a week. And some parents are like, oh, well, that's not a consequence. And it's like, have you ever been like a teenager? Do you want to sit and do schoolwork outside of school for 3 hours a week? Like, no, you don't. So it's solving. So it's problem solving and focused and directly, and this is super important, directly tied to the action or behavior.
Mhm.
When we move away from this, and I think this is a good transition, we can jump back and forth after this, but let's move towards contrived consequence to really understand this, because contrived consequence is where a lot of people get lost. And it very often is very punishment focused. And I'm not saying this is completely negative. There are some kids that need some level of like, oh, they're really not getting this or feeling this, or they just don't care. And contrived consequence starts to become something that systems start putting into place. Like, for example, if they're arrested, the juvie system is contrived. It is the legal system there. So it's a natural consequence to get into the system, but once they're in, very often it's contrived consequences about everything that's happening for them. Just one example. But when it comes to the parents and contrived, this is where we see really non focused reaction
Yes.
consequences. The you're grounded for 6 months, you're not going anywhere, I'm taking your car forever, whatever it might be, depending on their age and consequence of that. But yeah, it's really important to understand that natural consequences are things you really don't have to think much about because you just have to keep it in the same category versus contrived, which is very much I'm going to make you feel this. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that could be a little slippery. And I'll give an example
Very.
because when it comes to like a phone or technology, right? And let's stick with the homework example. Some parents will actually say it's actually very natural if the phone is the thing that's getting in the way, then that's a natural consequence. I'm going to take the phone away so there's no distraction, and then you can focus on your schoolwork. Makes sense. But if you start taking the phone away for them getting in an argument with you, or you start taking the phone away from them because they are fighting with their sister, that's when we're talking about contrived consequences and how it doesn't match the moment. And so being able to understand that sometimes with some kids, the phone is maybe the only leverage point, or that's where it's been reduced down to. And that's what the parents truly believe, which then again, with the support of somebody like myself or Rob, we have that bigger conversation of like, okay, let's actually redefine consequences because you've like pigeonholed yourself into the phone's the only way to make my kid pay attention. And so, yeah, I'll pause there. Rob, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, it's important that people understand that we're not saying don't do this.
Right.
Not what this conversation is. It's more of an understanding that there are two directions this can go. Excuse me, this can go. This is again in some aspect about assessing where your child's at. If a child is in
100%.
a place where natural consequences are impactful and educational, then you're really on the lower end of mental and behavioral health and kind of aspect of this kid being in what we call normal capacity of learning, right? And
Mhm.
this is emotional learning and life learning. Like this is just basic how do we live in society and groups and interact with other
Mhm.
humans and all of these things.
Yeah.
Contrived consequences really start to play a major role when you do get into those scenarios where it's like, okay, something is happening here. And very often that's where parents really miss it. They're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, all they care about is the phone. And that to me is just like, whoa, hold on. If that's true, there's an anxiety disorder, a depressive episode, like there's something
Some
diagnosable
imbalance.
to happen here that
Yeah.
like y'all really need to get a hold on so we know that the strategies and interventions and processes that are put in place are going to be impactful and educational and lead to them having more control as they launch into adulthood, hopefully, right? As they
Mhm.
get through this. So if you're a parent that you're hearing this and you're like, oh my God, the only thing that works is my kid like taking the technology away, that's a red flag. That's a like, hey, there's something deeper here. And it may be developed over time, and
Mhm.
that's normal. And be aware that that's where this really gets to is if you're in a place where the consequences are contrived because that's the only thing that can work, then your strategies need to shift for the long term. Maybe not
Mhm.
the short term, but the long term for absolutely sure to get them from where they are to where they need to be to function on their own behaviorally and in relationship and with work and money and all these things that start to happen as your kids become adults.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Rob. I just want to reinforce the idea of assessment, and of course, we look at it through a mental health lens. There's also the recognition that people go through moments of
Yeah.
transition, moments of struggle, moments of change in life that can initiate different behavior patterns, can instigate change in like what we might perceive as personality shifts, right? And I mean, even like the idea of school ending, and then all of a sudden their child's on a bunch of technology, or a, a young man, 15-year-old boy, breaks up with his girlfriend, and he had been very codependent, and then all of a sudden all he is on his phone, and so there's things to take a step back and go, okay, my son's in distress. My daughter is struggling. There's something below this behavior pattern that is worth acknowledging and validating and trying to connect with my child. And so again, it comes back to being measured. Am I
Yeah.
actually seeing the full picture before I step in with a consequence? And I think this is a good point to say, and you hinted at it, Rob, which is you don't need to give a consequence immediately. Having a reactive consequence is actually inappropriate, and it doesn't serve your child nor your relationship. And in fact, oftentimes it's even more impactful, just as you were saying, Rob, like a kid sitting with the fact that they did something wrong. And so to put that in a concrete example is you see your child or you pick up your child or all of a sudden you are starting to feel the bubbling nature of your anxiety or your fear, your anger, frustration, and confusion. That's not the moment to give the consequence. You say, hey, that's inappropriate. That's not what we do. That's something that we're going to need to talk about in a little bit. I need to go talk to your mom, and she and I are going to have a conversation, and we're going to come back and tell you like what we're going to be doing about that. And being able to take that time away from your child gives your child an opportunity to sit in the recognition that they did something that's out of bounds or out of the boundaries or expectations. And that is a consequence. Sitting in that level of discomfort actually is a challenge. It can promote change, it can promote growth because they're actually sitting in their discomfort. And that's something that gets ripped away from them when we immediately give a consequence because then they just get to be mad about the consequence. They're no longer thinking about the thing they did wrong. Now they're thinking about the thing that got taken away from them, especially if it's contrived. So
Yeah.
then there's like, they're in this locked horn challenge with their parent or their caregiver, when in actuality, they should be sitting with themselves. The lesson's lost. And so being able to slow yourselves down as parents, as caregivers, as, basically the holders of the container and step away, take some deep breaths and maybe talk to your partner and go, do you believe we're in this moment right
Yeah.
now? What he said or he did, my goodness, I just wanted to, and okay, now what are we going to do about it?
Yes.
Okay, this is the first time, or man, this is not the first time. And all right, what did we do last time? And okay, what do we feel like is appropriate? And how do we like step into having the conversation so that he truly learns
Yes.
in this moment?
Yep. So I feel like we're going to jump into a lot of different other conversation pieces unless we start to wrap this up, because I think for
Okay.
this episode, we just wanted to give an outline of understanding kind of the spectrum of consequence. And it's really just two main categories, but
Yep.
it's for assessment and it's for understanding the skill within it. So, my closing thoughts on this is, first of all, recognize that the natural side of this is what the goal is. If you
Right.
can remain on the natural, it's so much easier to maintain your relationship with the person, because it's just nature, it's the world, it's culture, it's not just you, it's
Mhm.
everybody playing this part that leads into the education and growth and process. So the more you can lean into natural consequences, the better. Including, and this is my kind of closing thought, is that if you're in contrived, and I'm going to use the example of the phone, and you're like, well, I'm going to take the phone away. I've run into a lot of parents that are like, well, that's all I did. I took the phone away for 3 weeks or a month or whatever. And it's like, okay, but what did they like have to do that would reinforce learning from what happened? And that's where parents got lost, is they thought the consequence was the phone was gone. And I think it's really important to understand that if natural is the goal and you're in contrived, then you still need to weave the natural over to the contrived consequence. So if you took the phone away, this is just one example, I highly encourage every parent to say, okay, I'm taking it away for 2 weeks or a week or whatever. It doesn't matter what timeline you might think you're putting on it, but I always want you to encourage this, and you get it back after that weekend, after you've problem solved the behavior that led to me doing this. Don't just leave it on the phone. That gives the phone so much power and meaning. And like, you're going to start seeing a lot of things. I mean, we see so many kids now, it's like tech addiction, when in reality, it's just that that tech became the most important thing in their life. And it was reinforced very often by consequences leading up to the events that the family's dealing with now. So it's not just take away this thing. And this is just one example. So if you're
Right.
a parent and you're like, well, that's not exactly what I do, it's like, great, then talk to someone like us and get some like, okay, how do we build this for you and what you're doing? But in this example, it's you get it back after a week, and after you've earned this much money, or you've painted that wall that was destroyed, or you like help your brother and sister with their homework for a week, or you whatever it is, right? Like, it's tied to the natural element of the behavior that led to you as a parent saying, great, taking your phone away again, right? Tie these worlds together if you want to see ultimate results there. That's my closing thought. Paul, what do you got for us?
I think you nailed it. I mean, quite honestly, like
Good.
what comes up for me is in order to be able to do this takes pausing and managing your reactivity, because what this takes is actually responding to your child, not reacting to your child. So if you notice your chest is tight, your throat is tight, you're struggling in the moment, take a break to then come back with some clarity and some understanding of how to appropriately meet that moment and meet your child.
Absolutely. All right. Well, as always, come find us at parenttrainers.com. Sign up for one of our trainings and get some coaching around what's going on for you specifically and your family. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you in the community and supporting everyone's unique situations and kind of say experiences that they're having with their kids. We'll see you there.